Good morning. Welcome. Muy buenos días. My name is Kelly Fay Rodriguez. I'm the Special Representative for International Labor Affairs at the Department of State. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you today, joining you in San Francisco, California, where some of the world's most powerful policymakers are meeting this week. But we are here today to talk about the most powerful force in our global economy, workers. Workers are the heart and soul of our country. Workers are the best of us, of our economy and our society. Today, the Biden-Harris administration launches a new federal policy that centers labor in our foreign diplomacy. This new pro-worker agenda honors people from around the world who, through their labor, dedicate themselves every day to provide for their families, to improve our communities, and to enrich our lives. Workers like my mother, Ruth Rodriguez, who was a bilingual education public school teacher in Worcester, Massachusetts, where I grew up with my sister. Workers like Chim Sitar from Cambodia, the president of the Casino Workers Union at Naga World, who remains unjustly imprisoned simply because of her union's activism. Workers are making important gains, like unions in South Africa, Germany, and in Brazil, who are working with governments and private sector to set key national policies that promote labor standards and strengthen their economies. Leaders like Mamadou Niang from the CGTM Union in Nouakchott, working to end hereditary slavery of Black Mauritanians. Colombian trade unions, advancing historic labor law reforms in a country with one of the highest rates of economic inequality. Also a country historically known worldwide for record attacks and murders of trade unionists. These workers are our parents, our siblings, our children, our cousins and co-workers and friends. They are our ancestors, and they are our future. They are the reason we are here today, to affirm that the U.S. government sees you, that we are for you, that we're better because of you, and that we want to have your back. Today's speakers will launch the new presidential memorandum on advancing worker empowerment, rights, and high labor standards globally. You will hear what this directive means and how the government will take action to make it real. We're very proud today to join you, union members in the room today, from the San Francisco Labor Council, from Unite Here, ILWU, AFSCME, SEIU, LIUNA, AFA, IBW, Teachers Union, Teamsters, and more. And with special recognition to the Labor Council Executive Director, Kim Tavaglione, thank you for having us in your home today. Lastly, we'd like to recognize the workers, Starbucks workers who are picketing today, and the Unite Here Local 2 workers from the Bay Hotel who are on strike this week. Thank you. Thanks for coming. First, we will hear from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, then from San Francisco Building Trades Council Secretary Treasurer Rudy Gonzalez, then from U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Catherine Tai, and bringing it home, Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su will grace us with her closing. Mr. Secretary.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I think the quickest thing we could do is to figure out who's actually not a union member in this room, because it wouldn't take much time. It is wonderful to be with all of you today. And Kelly, thank you, not just for this morning, but for being such a force for workers around the world. We're grateful. To my incredible colleagues, our Acting Secretary of Labor, Secretary Sue, Ambassador Tai, friends, colleagues who, by their leadership and by their partnership, are advancing labor rights here at home and around the world. And I'm especially honored to be joined today by the one, the only, our Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. But not just our Speaker, a great champion throughout her career for workers. To everyone joining us here as we release the United States' new Global Labor Director, welcome. And I'm very, very proud to start this day with you. In one of the very first speeches I had the opportunity to give as Secretary, I pledged that a simple question would help set our diplomatic priorities. What will our foreign policy mean for American workers and for their families? This is one of the core questions that we take to heart every single day as we're thinking about what we're doing around the world. We ask that question every day, from that windowless situation room where so much of our foreign policy is made, to forums like the APEC workers, driving economies across the Asia-Pacific region of the world, building our infrastructure, producing and shipping our goods, caring for our loved ones, developing new industries. We know that this is what workers are doing every single day around the world. And you can see that playing out here in real time at APEC, because so much of the progress that our region has made over the 30 years that APEC has been in existence has been driven by workers. And so it's our mission to try to ensure that workers are not only included in discussions of trade, investment, and growth, but they're there at the table at the takeoff, not just on the landing. Unfortunately, what we know, and you heard Kelly refer to this, is that in far too many places around this world, workers are not at the table. Even worse, places where working people are denied a decent living, subjected to harassment and abuse, harmed, even killed, for simply standing up for their rights. Service workers in Cambodia, agricultural leaders in Guatemala, labor lawyers in Eswatini, countless brave individuals fighting for the right to organize, to work under safe and healthy conditions, to be free from forced labor, trafficking, discrimination. And what we want all of them to know is this: the United States stands with them. It's pretty basic. We believe that every worker deserves to have their rights and dignity respected. That aligns with our deepest values. It also advances our interests because it's one of the most effective ways to promote broad-based, inclusive economic growth, which ultimately benefits American consumers, workers, businesses, investors. This is, we know it from our history, we know it from our experience, this is what lifts entire societies. Just look at the positive effects of unions, something this group knows better than anyone in the world. Unions raise wages for their members, but also for everyone else. Unions reduce gender and racial pay gaps. That makes societies fairer. Unions increase productivity, since better working conditions mean healthier and more efficient workers. And they help strengthen our democracies, which makes for the United States much better and more reliable partners around the world. For all these reasons, the United States government has been taking action to promote and defend the rights of working people, both here in the United States, but also around the world. Advocating for the rights of workers and raising labor standards, that is a central part of our diplomacy. It's a central part of our efforts at the Department of State. So, as you heard Kelly say today, President Biden signed a new presidential memorandum on advancing worker empowerment rights and high labor standards globally. And what this does is it formally recognizes that labor rights are key to our national security and to our foreign policy. This is not simply a domestic issue. It is for us a matter of national security, a matter of foreign policy. And it lays out, and I'll just address them very quickly, 5 lines of efforts to proactively integrate and elevate workers' rights around the world. First, we will engage governments, workers, labor organizations, trade unions, civil society, and the private sector around the world to protect and promote respect for internationally recognized labor rights. That means, for instance, that all of our ambassadors, all of the folks running our embassies around the world will engage with workers, with unions, so that their voices are reflected in everything that we do. Second, we will work to hold accountable those who threaten, who intimidate, who attack union leaders, labor rights defenders, labor organizations, including using things like sanctions, trade penalties, visa restrictions, all the tools in our kit. We want to be there for people like Kalpana Adkar, a Bangladeshi garment worker, an activist, who says that she is alive today because the U.S. Embassy advocated on her behalf. When we use our voice, when we use our advocacy around the world, we can make a concrete difference in making sure that those who are trying to advance labor rights are protected and defended. Third, we will strengthen the federal government's capacity to advance worker rights abroad by prioritizing greater job opportunities for employees with labor expertise, training our personnel to know about worker rights, to look for and prevent abuses. Fourth, we will work with governments and multilateral institutions like the United Nations, the G20, to promote labor rights and standards. This will be part of the work that we do in these international organizations where so many of the rules are set. It happens in windowless rooms around the world, but it's important. The standards, the norms, the rights that are established, these have a profound effect around the world. We're going to be in there making sure that we're advocating for labor. Finally, we will step up our due diligence and enforcement to ensure that our own trade agreements, supply chains, protect workers, and that we're not importing goods made with forced labor. This is a real, concrete step toward delivering on a foreign policy that works for all of the American people. We'll continue looking to each of you, to your colleagues in the labor movement, for your engagement, for your feedback, for your partnership, because simply put, we can't do this effectively alone. Everyone knows the power in joining together to improve the lives of working people. So, with that said, it's a great pleasure to turn this over to one of those key partners, Secretary-Treasurer of the San Francisco Building Trades Council, a member of the USMCA Independent Mexico Labor Expert Board, Rudy Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. It's an honor to be here, not just for myself, for my family who came here seeking a better life, but for all the workers that we represent. In the trade union movement, we've long known that when we stand together, we have power. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we're standing in a hotel that many of us walked a picket line on in 2018 for 63 days. This hotel took 10 years to even have a collective bargaining agreement for the first time, and the brave workers at the Bay Hotel, 3 of those strikers who are here today, continue the legacy, and because of that, they have full family health care, they have safety, they have dignity, they have protection against discrimination, regardless of what religion they practice, if any, where they come from, where they long to be, and who they love. We know that those brave workers need to be shouted out, they need to be elevated, and I want to call on 3 of them to stand up briefly at their seats. Isaias Galvez, Shumin Liu, and Nira Remigio. They are the embodiment of the trade union movement, each with their own story to be an American trade unionist, to be proud members of Local 2. I'm looking at my kids who are here, Jules and Isaac, and they know that all day, all night ends with Local 2 on strike. I have to say that the enforcement at home is as important as the enforcement abroad, and we could not be more proud of U.S. Trade Representative and Ambassador Tai, of Acting Secretary of Labor Julie Su, the Frances Perkins of our times, and of course our Secretary of State, who has International President Willie Adams of the Longshoremen Union reminded us just moments ago in another room that we have restored the dignity and our rightful place on the world stage. And that matters for democracy, that matters for global security, but it also matters for the power of the international trade union movement. And so we thank the Secretary of State for your leadership. We're racking up the wins in the U.S. labor movement. Auto workers, Teamsters, screen actors, the longshoremen workers, home care workers of SCIU 2015. I see my brother Alnufo in the room. And abroad, the U.S. government is making good on a promise, not just to protect our workers here in the United States, but to make sure that our sisters, brothers, and siblings across the globe also have the might of the U.S. labor movement and the U.S. government at their back. This global labor strategy is a whole government framework. It's unique, but it's also fitting that we have 3 cabinet members here to celebrate this important win for American and international workers. This is the first time in our history that there has been explicit instructions from the federal government to prioritize workers. We're used to businesses being prioritized, and we've supported that to level the playing field. But it's important that we call it and tell it like it is. We have to protect workers internationally in order to protect our own and in order to protect United States values for all that are affected by these policies. This new directive is a win for all of workers. In the international labor movement, we know that workers' rights are also essential to our own country's foreign policy, national, and economic security. Building off of many presidential initiatives that the Biden-Harris administration has led on, including the Biden-Lula Partnership for Workers' Rights, the White House Task Force on Worker Organizing and Empowerment, the Global Labor Strategy today that we celebrate calls on all U.S. government agencies to build these partnerships and expand President Biden's worker-centered framework abroad. It's fun to see it on social media. It's great to see it in rallies. I never thought I would see a United States president walking a picket line, but there it was. But oftentimes, as our Secretary of State alluded to, the devil's in the details, and these negotiations happen often, not in the public and very much in private. And so having this important directive means that all of our government officials will be advocating for workers' interests and to make sure that this global directive is the beginning of a new day for workers internationally. This will importantly create measures that enable swift responses when there are violent threats, like we see in Mexico with the blacklisting of manufacturing workers. We know that we can do this work. We know that when we are coordinated, as we were through Ambassador, U.S. Trade Representative Ty's work at the time, and our Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi's steadfast negotiations at the table when we won worker protections in the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, we know that rapid response mechanisms can have an impact. We know that we can impose sanctions, and we must pursue these cases to the fullest extent of the law and support the workers on the ground who are organizing. This takes that framework, it builds upon that success, and it takes us to the next level of international labor rights. By raising worker issues to the highest levels of our government, this new directive underscores President Biden's commitment to all working people. This strategy recognizes that no matter where we live, all workers deserve to have dignity and respect on the job. There's a lot of attention to our fine city, and like many of you, I'm a proud native son of San Francisco. Speaker Emerita Pelosi has brought leadership and dignity and our values across the nation and across the globe, and I want to especially thank you for the honor and privilege it has been to serve alongside of you in our roles. So please join me in thanking Speaker Pelosi. I would add that we have many moments of history and we have many opportunities to see a bright horizon in the future. But that history comes from being the fortress that is San Francisco. Yes, we are a beacon of progressive values. We are a beacon of hope for workers and for immigrants. But we also know that that legacy builds upon struggle. It builds upon class struggle. It's often been seen with bloodshed in our streets and general strikes. We know that collective bargaining works, and we will continue to uphold the values and principles of the American trade union movement right here in the heartbeat of our union movement in San Francisco. I couldn't be more proud than to introduce the next speaker. Our United States Trade Representative is truly doing the work. Her sleeves are rolled up on a daily basis, and she is consistently with the most pro-union presidential administration in our lifetimes. She is the fierce and most pro-union, pro-worker champion that we have seen in our lives at the U.S. Trade Representative's office. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Tai to the stage.
Thank you so much, Rudy. I'm truly, truly honored by that introduction and incredibly inspired by your words. I just want to start by saying, what is the U.S. Trade Representative? A lot of my conversations start this way because we're a small agency and it's a kind of a niche job. I just do one thing, and that's trade. By statute, I am the President's principal advisor, negotiator, and spokesperson on trade. I just wanted to talk a little bit about being a negotiator in this room. It's actually incredibly humbling to be a negotiator in this room, from our union leaders and our union members, Secretary Blinken on the world stage, Julie Su, my dear friend, also my inspiration in the administration. I would say that your record in terms of facilitating successful outcomes has been a perfect one so far. And of course, Speaker Pelosi, probably the greatest negotiator of all time, truly. I wanted to share with you because earlier in my career, I had the incredible fortune and privilege of seeing the speaker in action. And words that she is really known for are know your power. And I think that there are a lot of people in the world who want to know their power. But when I've watched the speaker in action, what I know is that knowing your power allows you to be effective. And the point of being effective is so that you can do good in the world. And that is very much an inspiration for what we are trying to do with President Biden's worker-centered trade policy. We have taken our workers and put them at the center of our trade policy because we know that our economy is more than just a bunch of numbers. It is more than just data sets. It is more than just charts and graphs. Our economy is made up of people, our workers, and the communities that they live in and support. So we know that our economic policies, including and maybe especially our trade policies, have to work for our workers. Our trade policies need to empower our workers, to equip our workers to succeed, not just today, but also for the generations to come. This presidential memorandum is a core part of our administration's broader vision to do just that, to build our economy from the middle out and from the bottom up, not from the top down, and to ensure that our trade policies foster the same types of worker empowerment among our partners and our allies, especially when we seek to bring our economies into closer contact and cooperation with each other. It can be really too easy to talk about economic policies, even policies like worker empowerment, in a vacuum. We have to conduct our work keeping in mind the faces and the hopes and aspirations of the people, the real people whose lives are truly impacted by the policies that we work on. The workers that power our factories, the workers that teach our children, make our clothes, care for our elderly, sick, and young. Only when we put them at the heart of what we are doing can we truly use our policies as a force for doing good. This memorandum is our way of saying that we, the United States, we see workers, both here at home and abroad, that we understand that in an interconnected global economy, the rights of workers around the world impact the rights of workers in the United States and vice versa. That we stand with workers and that we are fighting for workers and with workers. This is our way of crafting a world where dignity is an inalienable right, where fairness is not a cost of doing business, but it is the only and the best way of doing business, where hope and opportunity are not distant abstractions, but they are present realities. And that is why our new story on trade puts workers and their rights at the center, and why we do the same throughout our foreign policy under this memorandum. We are enforcing existing trade rules, including under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. We have used the Rapid Response Labor Enforcement Mechanism under the USMCA more than a dozen times, and it is bringing real change to workers and their families in Mexico. Tens of thousands of workers have voted for independent unions and approved new collective bargaining agreements because of this mechanism. Hundreds of workers who were wrongfully dismissed for lawful union activities under Mexican law have been reinstated with back pay. And thousands have received significant pay increases and improvements to their working conditions. Real change affecting real people and their livelihoods being made possible through a trade agreement. We are so proud of the fact that we have tools that allow us to flip the narrative on its head, that trade can be a force for good and trade can be a tool for raising living standards and for empowering workers abroad and therefore at home. We are also embedding our focus on benefiting workers in our new trade initiatives, developing and negotiating labor standards and trade agreements that build on what is in the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. And we are not willing to settle for watered-down results that prioritize more trade over worker-centered trade. We are teaming up with old friends like the European Union, not that they're old, but they've been our friends for a long time, with whom we have a vibrant and active trade and labor dialogue in order to elevate the voices of workers on both sides of the Atlantic and bring transatlantic and global trade and labor issues to the fore. We are defending workers' rights and combating forced labor at every level of the supply chain, for example, by ensuring that Canada and Mexico join us and partner up with us to employ trade and customs tools to combat forced labor in their supply chains. And we're also working with close allies like Japan to launch a task force to address forced labor together. It's kind of incredible for me to say this, but we are also doing work at the World Trade Organization to revamp that entity so that it can take workers' interests into account. The common thread through all of this is our commitment to bring workers' voices to the decision-making table, to craft our trade policies with and for workers, to meet them, to meet all of you and your communities where you are, where you live, where you work, where you raise your families, so that your priorities can help shape our policies. I'm thinking of Steve Dawes and his team in Flint, Michigan, whom I met 2 years ago for UAW Local 598. John Holden and the machinists in Washington State, Anthony Alfano and others that are part of the Chicago Federation of Labor. I'm thinking of Annie Enrique Gueron of the Public Services Labor Independent Confederation in the Philippines, whom I also met, and Imelda Jimenez of Los Mineros in Mexico. I am making a point to meet with union leaders and workers during my foreign travel, to let our trading partners know that there is no more pitting our workers against one another, to further our collaboration, to build and to strengthen our working communities and middle classes together. Building our economy from the middle out and the bottom up is something that we all want to do, it turns out. If you travel as much as I do around the world, and I know some of you do because the labor movement is an international one, you realize that the hope for economic opportunity and security is a shared hope amongst our fellow human beings. So our vision is to change the way that we do trade so that we are growing our middle classes together. And the core of that is to empower our workers together. To get there, our trading partners need to meet and hear directly also from not just our CEOs, but our leaders of our labor movement. And that is why in May, I was honored to invite UAW President Shawn Fain and AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Frederick Redmond to speak with my Asia-Pacific Trade Minister colleagues at a first-ever labor discussion forum during APEC. It was important for our partners and these Asia-Pacific trade ministers to hear directly from our workers because, honestly, your story is a lot more credible coming from you than when it's coming from me in a trade negotiation or a forum in a faraway place. That is also why I was so excited and so proud to participate in an extremely thoughtful discussion with African labor leaders just last week, I think it was, Kelly, during the AGOA Forum hosted in Johannesburg. The work that we are doing is about building a community, a coalition of people who care enough to act. And today is a reminder that President Biden is leading us in the right direction. Take a look around you and around this room. Workers like our steel workers have built the literal backbone and skeleton and infrastructure of the building that we are meeting in today. Our nation was built on their back. Our nation was built by all of you and your predecessors. So it is only fitting that we make clear that we have your back. This memorandum brings together the power of the United States government to use our trade and international policy tools for good, to take meaningful steps forward with the working people that make up the core of all of our societies. I look forward to working with Secretary Blinken, Secretary Sue, our colleagues, and all of you in the coming months. And now I have the privilege of introducing my good friend and colleague, someone who has been a champion for workers, their voice, and their futures her entire career. I'm so honored to be able to serve with you, Julie, our Acting Secretary of Labor, Julie Sue.
Gosh. All right, so now I have to do what Kelly said, which is bring it home, right here at home. But thank you so much for that, Catherine. I am so grateful for your leadership and your partnership. And under your leadership, the United States is writing a new story about trade and making clear that labor rights are not an obstacle to trade policy. It's really a cornerstone of it. And there is no one better to lead us and make that real than you. So thank you very, very much for... And I also want to, of course, thank Secretary Blinken for what everyone has already said, but also his deep dedication to lifting up workers and workers' rights and workers' voices all around the world. And I want to recognize our Speaker Emerita, our Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, who... I know, you can't say her name without getting that kind of reaction, but I also want to say as a woman leader, as a fierce defender of workers' rights, as somebody who, it's about knowing your power, but also about unleashing your power. And I ask at the Department of Labor every day, what are we doing to unleash the full power of the department for the good of working people? You embody what it means to unleash power whenever you have it. And so thank you so much for that. And I want to thank Brother Rudy Gonzalez for being such a phenomenal leader. We were just together here in San Francisco recently, and it's so amazing to be here with you again and to be with everybody in this room. You all are why we are gathered here in San Francisco. It's about all the other things, but it's also about the incredible labor movement that is built and nurtured right here in San Francisco. And it's about the worker leaders in this room and around the world who are really demonstrating what is possible when workers have real power. So as you all know, every worker deserves a just day's pay for a hard day's work. Every worker should come home healthy and safe at the end of the day. And every worker should have a right to join a union. And these are not just American values. They apply to workers around the world. And in President Biden's America, we want to lead by example. So we are supporting workers across our country, from healthcare to hospitality to Hollywood, from teachers to flight attendants, from delivery drivers to longshoremen, who are demanding their fair share and who are saying that we deserve to be valued. So let's look at the auto industry. We've already talked about that some, but last week I was with President Biden in Belvidere, Illinois, where a factory that had been closed is now going to reopen. And it's not just going to bring back jobs, it's going to grow new jobs, so the future of an industry that's in transition is going to be built by union workers. And that only happened because unions had a seat at the bargaining table and was able to demand that kind of outcome. And that's right. I mean, that's in addition to the historic wage increases and the benefits and the retirement and having a say in the future of the industry that was demonstrated by that particular negotiation. And as so many of you in this room know, as President Adams knows well and gave me the great privilege of seeing up close in his negotiation, collective bargaining works. And wins for unions are not just wins for union members, they're also wins for non-union workers. We're seeing that again in the auto industry with the wage increases that have already been made in non-union, by non-union companies. President Sean Fain calls that the UAW bump, and he is right about that. And we see that in all kinds of industries today. And you all know that leadership matters. And we've seen positive trends for workers' rights and increased power for unions and for collective bargaining, and in that process, because we have a president who supports workers using their voice. It's different when I walk into the room and can say that this president believes that the only people who can decide whether a contract is fair are the members themselves. And that matters, and that's why Union Joe is making a difference, and that's why having the most pro-union, pro-worker president in history is making a difference, and that's what we celebrate today with this presidential memorandum. Now, at the same time, we all know that there's a lot more work that we have to do, and corporations are global, so workers and worker power and the way we think about workers have to be global as well. So when some corporations cut corners and contract out work to low-road businesses that exploit workers around the world, it creates an unfair playing field for every responsible business that does right by its workers. When global actors are allowed to evade labor laws in one country by exploiting workers in another part of the world, this undermines workers' rights everywhere. And when workers are harassed, discriminated against, and attacked as they produce things that are sold all around the world, we cannot simply look away and ignore the ways that our global economy brings with it global responsibility. In other words, what happens in Bangladesh also affects working families across the United States, from Birmingham to Boston to Bellingham. And in recent weeks, in Bangladesh, garment workers have been risking their lives and in some cases have even been killed protesting for a fair minimum wage. This is unacceptable. And that's why today's announcement is so historic. Now, for the first time, the United States will use a whole-of-government approach to elevate labor rights around the world. At the U.S. Department of Labor, this is core to what we do. So when my team meets with leaders at ministries of labor around the world, we advocate for workers' rights to organize and collectively bargain. To further this work, we've expanded our network of labor attachés around the world from 1 to 10. And they work closely with their State Department counterparts to embed labor rights in our foreign policy. You already heard both Rudy and Ambassador Tai talk about our work in Mexico, and we are grateful to work under the great leadership of Ambassador Tai and her team, as well as the Mexican Labor Ministry, on making sure that the provisions of the USMCA are meaningful and real, and to build an infrastructure so that Mexican workers can truly have a union of their choice. And we've launched the Multilateral Partnership for Organizing Worker Empowerment and Rights, or MPOWER. And with MPOWER, we are elevating the role of freedom of association and independent unions. Because, as has already been said, strong labor organizations aren't just foundational for workers' rights, they are foundational for healthy, inclusive democracies. The Department of Labor is also expanding its work to combat forced labor and to improve transparency and accountability from the bottom to the top of global supply chains. I know how important this is because I've seen it up close. And you will all remember this story from California, when 72 garment workers who had been trafficked to the United States from Thailand and were forced to work behind barbed wire and under armed guard, sewing garments for 18 hours a day. This happened in part because these workers, who were overwhelmingly women, faced poverty wages or lack of opportunity at home, which made them vulnerable to traffickers who promised them a good job in the United States. And that promise turned out to be a lie. They sewed garments right here in California until their fingers were raw and their vision blurred. And once these workers were discovered, they did the unimaginable. They fought back. And I was privileged to be their attorney at that time, and we brought a challenge against the multi-billion industry in which they were working. Because human trafficking is just one of the many examples of how labor abuse and lack of rights for workers in one part of the world makes them more vulnerable to abuse elsewhere, and how the global demand for cheap labor also makes workers vulnerable in every part of our globe. And in the Biden-Harris administration, we are using every tool we have to stop this. So now, with the presidential memorandum, every federal agency is committed to use all the tools at their disposal to empower workers around the world and to lift up workers' rights to organize. The real measure of our progress is not going to be in policy pronouncements. It's not going to be in dollars of investments. It's not going to be in numbers, as Ambassador Tai already said. It's going to be in seeing workers using their voices to stand up and fight for their basic needs. It's going to be in more workers joining together and exercising their fundamental rights to organize. More workers rejecting the message that they've been told their whole lives that they should just keep their heads down and know their place. Because we in this room know that workers' place is at the table, it's on the picket line, it's in the headquarters where decisions are being made, and that's what it means to have a pro-worker, pro-union president who believes in worker power and workers' ability to demand more. And this will happen when we see more workers gaining their footing in the middle class, not just in this country, but around the world. So I look forward to continuing to work with all of you here and around the world to make sure that the U.S. government leads by example and that we make real and profound progress together. Thank you all so, so much. And let's get it done.